more people when it was snowing. But anyway, feel free to come sit in the front row. You know, you don't have to sit way in the back. Everybody's hiding in the back. Sit in the front. Sit in the front.
Yeah. I missed last week. Were we reading 2 chapters for this week or just 1?
We're going to finish the chapter on self-acceptance and then move on to the next chapter on letting go of resistance. All right. So welcome back to Gunnakumpinling. Or if this is your first time, welcome here for the first time. We're going to start with setting our motivation for coming today. So we have these little prayer booklets. So why don't we just stop and just think to yourself, you know, why am I here today? What was my intention, my motivation for getting out of a warm bed, jumping into a cold car, driving all the way to Reading, Connecticut? All right, we'll do this prayer together. How wonderful it would be if all living beings were to abide in equanimity, free from attachment and hatred. May they abide in that way. I shall cause them to abide in that way. Please bless me to be able to do so. How wonderful it would be if all living beings have happiness and its causes. May they have those. I shall cause them to have those. Please bless me to be able to do so. How wonderful it would be if all living beings were free from suffering and its causes. May they be free. I shall cause them to be free. Please bless me to be able to do so. How wonderful it would be if all living beings were never parted from fortune's supreme bliss of liberation. May they never be parted. I shall cause them never to be parted. Please bless me to be able to do so. So as always, we start these sessions with a short meditation session. So we'll begin by just sitting comfortably, keeping your back nice and straight, your shoulders a little bit back and dropped. You keep your eyes open, looking down the floor before you, or keep them closed, whichever is more comfortable. So we ground ourselves in the present moment. Feeling safe. Feeling protected. Feeling loved and secure. In this meditation, we're focusing on generating self-compassion, self-acceptance, being a good friend to ourselves. And so it may be helpful to place your hand on your heart, or on your belly, using the sense of touch to caress yourself, like a good friend might reach out and hold your hand. Bring your attention to the rhythm of the breath in the body. Experiencing the breath throughout the entire universe of the body. Feeling the body as a whole as it responds to the inhalation and the exhalation. Notice the subtle differences, the inhalation and the exhalation. Allow the breath to move your entire body. There's no need to consciously inhale or exhale. Allow the body to breathe forward. Gently relax into that natural rhythm. The inhalation and exhalation of the breath. Every time distractions arise, whether it's thoughts, sensations, just gently bring your attention back to the gentle rhythm of the breath.
Hey, Buster. Yeah, I'm doing good. Listen, I'm just getting ready to go into a class. Are you going to be around later? Can I call you back? Okay. I don't know. I'm like thinking of maybe running some flowers into an elderly friend of mine. So I'm kind of, but I'm around. I'm around today. Okay, cool. Bye.
And gently release your attention to your breath, silently in your own experience. Allow yourself to feel whatever you're feeling right now. To be just as you are. Bring your attention back to sounds in the room, the fragrance of the incense in the air. And when you're ready, slowly open your eyes. All right, so we are continuing our discussion about self-acceptance, which is in the book Fearless Heart. And we didn't quite finish it last week, so I thought we would start with just a brief review of what we heard had talked about. So this is chapter 2, if you're following along in the book, and then we should be able to get through talk about chapter 3 as well. So the discussion last week talked about the difference between self-esteem and self-compassion, right? And we were trying to understand some of the subtleties in both of those stuff. And we talked about how self-esteem implies assigning a value to ourselves, right? We're talking about that sense of worth, and talked about how everyone wants to be, better than average. That was a term that Tendrol used. It reminded me of, anybody used to watch or listen to Garrison Keillor? Remember Lake Wobegon, where all the kids were above average, right? And so, self-esteem is that tendency to think how we measure up to others, right? In all aspects of our identity, right? Including our performance, our appearance, our possessions, our internal qualities, as well as our external behavior and actions, right? And so it's very much wrapped up with the sense of like self-identity. Who do we think we are? That projection that we are forward, outward-facing projection of ourselves that has a very profound influence on how we think of ourselves as well. So how do we see ourselves in the eyes of others is very much dependent, closely related to how we define ourselves. We see ourselves from their perspective, right? We tend to think of ourselves in terms of how others see us. I think it's like seeing ourselves or defining ourselves in the mirror of outsiders, almost like public opinion. And so if we find in our lives, that we're very isolated, and that tends to be a trend in modern Western society in particular, where communities are more fragmented and individuals are living alone a lot more. And so if we lack the support of friends and families, close, even coworkers or faith groups, community groups, right? So in isolation, since we don't have that support, then it's easier for us to get lost, to lose that healthy sense of who we are. And so that our habitual tendency is to depend on the support of others to validate who we are and to support our sense of self-worth, in a healthy way, to give us self-confidence in a healthy way. And instead, one of the things that we talked about in the last class, based on a writing by Tendrol, how do we move forward with compassion? Right? How can compassion help us develop a healthy sense of of who we are. And she talked about how compassion is an ability to let go completely of this sense of self-identity that is, again, developed and cultivated based on our interactions with other people. So it's that projection that becomes almost like a standalone, image of who we are. And so compassion allows us to see through that, see through the shiny, razzling, dazzling image that we create, understanding that it is, just a hallucination. Not hallucination, it's just like an advertisement that we've created based on input from other people. Right? So that false image is the one that we need to be able to see through and accept the fact that it is just something that we've created. And so by relinquishing that self-identity, by letting go of having to put the effort and intensity, that the resources that are required to maintain that self-image, right? It's almost like a facade. Right? Being able to let go of that, seeing it for what it is, then that's in itself self-care. Self-care is realizing that we don't need to do that, realizing that that's a fiction, and being able to put it aside. All right. So Tutum Jimpa said on page 29, if you're following along, with self-compassion, we relate to ourselves, especially our struggles and failure, with understanding, kindness, and acceptance. Self-compassion is a gentle, caring, clear-seeing, yet non-judgmental orientation of our heart and minds towards our own suffering and needs. So, what do you think? What are some of the other, because I know a lot of you have read the book, what are some of the other key qualities of self-compassion that set it apart from self-esteem? Right? Anybody want to take a crack at that? What's the difference between self-compassion and self-esteem? And it's worth going into this because as we go through the chapters, we move on through the book. Sometimes, if you don't have a really good sense of what the two are, then it gets convoluted and it gets confusing. So that's why I want to spend the time to make sure we tease these out a little more.
It seems like there's a strong component of a vulnerability with the self-compassion piece of like just seeing yourself and accepting yourself as compared to the self-esteem, which is usually it's like because when we see ourselves for who we are and we just accept that means we're possibly like letting other people open to that too. Like it seems like more like an opening up, like it's you have to put your guard down and see yourself
more realistically,
and that's a hard thing to do, right? Or it could be potentially. So it seems like sometimes self-esteem it could be like you said, an advertisement. It could be like a what would you call it? Like I don't want to say like a false refuge, but like we can kind of hide a little bit behind it. You know what I mean? Instead of facing reality, the truth.
Okay. Yeah.
Once you get to a place of letting go of the advertisement and having self-compassion, with also covering it with boundaries, so you don't get swallowed up, and still have a sense of self, non-self, being the other person.
Boundaries vis-a-vis with others in relationship to other people who might be putting demands on your time or asking for things. Okay, so we'll talk about that in a second. And yeah, okay. But what if you had low self-esteem? What if it was the other way? Some people have very I was gonna say bad opinion of themselves, but they don't love themselves for who they are. They don't see their own worth. They think that everybody else is better than them in all aspects.
Sometimes people have super low self-esteem and they may do good, but they give everything to everyone else without any self-care.
Mhm. Mhm. Stephen?
Well, yeah, this is a really sticky one for me, but I think, our self-esteem I think we all start off pretty level, when we're born, but I think that self-esteem is a result of, experiences.
Uh-huh.
I think for self-compassion, it's trying to be totally objective without judgment. Yeah, I can see events or things that in my life that make it challenging. Be total, really to get to a point of radical self-compassion. Because it's almost like I get it that, we're all human, we all struggle, we all suffer, we all have, shortcomings or things. But then somewhere along the line, that judgment kind of creeps in. Like, well, maybe I should have done different, or maybe I should know better, or maybe that's because of what, me. There's a blame somewhere along there.
So the judgment starts to creep in
Which
versus being.
that doesn't allow, that makes it more difficult for that. I think it's, I think a person can have compassion for others, even if they don't really treat themselves the same way.
Right. You could have compassion for others, but not for yourself.
But, there was a part of the book that says about treat yourself as a parent. Like I would never not give a kid a second chance or something.
Right. But you might not give yourself a second
Right.
chance.
It's
Okay.
I don't know. There's still, to me, there's still kind of just so difficult to separate. It's just at some level.
Okay. Yvonne?
So maybe to help you with that is this concept of unconditional love for yourself. So that's separate from behaviors. So you can still love yourself, even if you've done things that you really are unhappy about. But that core, just like you would treat a child, right? Where, as you said, a second chance. That may be a way to consider that self-compassion for yourself.
Okay. So it seems like one of the components here that we need to come back to over and over again is that self, right? That sense of, maybe particularly in terms of like the self-esteem for those of us who have too high a sense of self-worth, right? Then humility, Ginger points that out. Humility can be a quality that we need to cultivate. Because this all comes back to thinking that I'm better than everybody else, that my needs are more important than anybody else's, that my social image, my possessions, if it all comes back to me being the center of the universe, then it's going to be very difficult to develop compassion for others, as well as realizing that we ourselves, need to take care of our own, to develop self-compassion, self-acceptance, right? That realistic self-acceptance that sees things like you were mentioning, to accept our strengths, but also to accept our weaknesses. Right? So when this is particularly important when things get rough, right? When we run into a situation where maybe we don't, things don't go the way we want. that maybe we don't fulfill a task, or we don't perform as well as we anticipated, right? And when those circumstances arise, then if we don't have that skill, we don't have a resource of self-compassion, if all we have is great self-esteem but no self-compassion, right, then we're not going to be able to care for ourselves. Then we are more likely to fall into depression, to find ourselves very isolated. Right? So I think that's important, humility and taking the, like Tendrol Rinpoche was talking about, giving up that strong sense of an independent self-identity, being able to realistically accept our strengths and weaknesses, not to be aggressive to ourselves, not practicing self-hatred, being somewhere in the middle, right? So being a good friend means, a good friend to yourself means being a loyal supporter when times get rough, as well as when things are going well. And using that strength, that balanced sense of who we are, being able to have that under all circumstances, then that gives us the capacity to be present for others as well. That makes sense. Because we can see that if we're experiencing these ups and downs, if we ourselves are experiencing suffering, then seeing that we're not isolated, seeing that others are in the same situation, that the other people might also not know how to be their own best friends, not know how to accept themselves, right? Then that's something that we have in common. That's something that we can help others with, right? Again, but the main focus here, though, is accepting ourselves. The side benefit, the side benefit is that we can then extend, by being stronger and happier ourselves, then that radiates to those around us. All right. Anything else that anybody wants to share? We're going to just move on to chapter 3, which is from fear to courage.
I think that people who appear to have super high self-esteem, narcissistic type of people, they're most likely have the lowest self-esteem.
Could be. Can you think of any particular example? Or?
Now, people are known that might be the center of attention, everyone seems to love them, and then finding out they're an alcoholic and they're really in a desperate place.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah, it could be. So they created this very elaborate image of themselves that they project very successfully, yet inside they're the complete opposite. Yeah. That's a good point. So in the following chapter, chapter 3, from fear to courage, Jimpa talks about how we need other people's kindness the most when we're feeling vulnerable. But that when we're in those situations, oftentimes it's very difficult to ask for help and to benefit from any help that is offered, right? So not only is it difficult to ask for help, sometimes when help is offered, sometimes we're unable to see it for what it is, and sometimes we just turn away from it. We shut down, right? And so what are some of the key barriers when what's going on in those situations? Why is it hard to be a good friend to ourselves and to seek the help that we need?
Sometimes it's embarrassing.
Okay, so a sense of shame, maybe? Yeah,
Pride.
right, yeah, pride, shame, anything else?
Some people feel they don't deserve it.
Yeah, feeling that you don't deserve it. Yeah. And that's tied back to that self-esteem, right? All of this, yeah, and I think pride is actually one of the underlying commonalities. So pride.
I think at those moments, we're also more inclined to connect to the wrongs we've either done to those we care about or ourselves too. So I think that makes it more difficult.
Okay. So going back to, in a specific situation, reflecting back on harm that you may have brought to to the relationship,
Yeah,
and that's a barrier to being able to then ask for help.
Yeah, I think when you hit a low point, I think you connect to other low points in your life. It reinforces maybe some negative feelings or self-doubt.
Right. Yeah. So I think there's a sense of fear, right? Fear maybe to open up, fear to accept our own vulnerabilities, maybe. Fear to ask for compassion. Maybe fear of rejection. Yeah, so both fear that you don't deserve it, fear that you'll be rejected. Dan?
Cyclical, sort of like, the last experience was not what you'd hope, and then you feel like you're going to be repeating it again and again. Cyclical, this is my lot in life. This tragedy happened and whatever, and then you give yourself a chance to say, I could break.
So a sense of hopelessness, like this is a cycle that's going to repeat as it has in the past.
Yeah, even defining it by saying, like, you try to act positive, but history keeps repeating itself. Maybe hearing it from your aged grandmother or somebody that's lived a long time, and saying, those people are, whatever they are, people defining you based on historical things.
So you're being
your great grandmother, your grandmother, that's the way that family, that's the curse or something. None of that is maybe true.
of course, yeah.
And
But it becomes ingrained in you, right?
Yeah.
Kind of accept it. We don't question it.
It becomes cyclical. I mean, you just sort of 5 years ago, I was just thinking of one of my cousins who's been married 5 times. I mean,
Fifth time's a charm.
What?
Fifth time is a charm.
Well, that's what we said on the third.
Some people get buried in the sense of low self-esteem, no self-compassion, and the biggest mistake is valuing yourself based on how others see them. And
Right.
it's a fairy tale, the ugly duckling, but it's the ugly duckling is still basing value on how being in the wrong place.
We're all ugly ducklings.
Okay. Refusing to accept that you can go through this glass, that you can change. It's not a permanent glass.
That you can break through.
Yeah, it's not getting thicker. It's getting.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe it's the fear to try. Fear to give yourself a chance.
Exactly.
Fear to try and just accept it. Maybe sometimes it's easier for us to just accept the ceiling and give up, right, than to have the courage to try.
I think if the bigger the event, something small, you're more willing to try.
Mhm.
But, you know, if you're talking about moving, putting the rudder on the aircraft carrier, changing your whole lifestyle,
Mhm.
that would be.
Right. Right. Small change, step by step change.
It is really about pride. It's so much about pride. Seeking help because there's things that I think I should know, and if I, expose myself that I don't know it, that I'm not who I am, and I don't know if that's a Western culture thing or upbringing, but you don't ask for directions. I can think of at work, there'd be a conversation at work, we would talk about, not that I even really watch TV, but some TV show or, "Oh, did you see that?" And I'm like, yeah, that was cool. I never even saw it. I just want to be part of the conversation, so to speak. That kind of goes into other areas. There's something I feel I need help with. I don't know, try to struggle through it myself, or find a way not to have to know that and have an impact me. Than to let someone know that I don't know how to do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think as Americans, I mean, we're taught to be very independent, right? I'm not supposed to be asking people for help. It's just like in the culture, you have to stand up on your own 2 feet. Yeah, like that's why there's so many self-help books. Like, come on, we shouldn't be trying to do this stuff by ourselves, especially this emotional stuff. Buy a self-help book, go somewhere. Talk to a good therapist. I've forgotten your name. I'm sorry.
It's Bray.
Bree.
Bree. Yeah.
Like, okay. Bree.
I'm just hearing all these responses, and it just sounds like a lot of shoulds and a lot of thoughts. Sounds like a lot of all the whatever the stories that we tell ourselves, all these cultural influences. Oh, you should do this. You should do that. Should know this, or a lot of shoulds. And that's a lot of the seems like a lot of this internal thinking world. We're missing out on like what is really happening. Like we're projecting a lot of our stories onto our experiences when it's not the reality. Like I heard, we should, we think other people think this of us, so we should act that way. We don't know what they're thinking. There's no way that we know what they're thinking. Right. That's not the reality. But in our minds it is. Like we're believing our thoughts as a reality. And thoughts are not reality.
Right.
So, and that just
it's a good point. Like that, all that filtering.
Yeah.
This is what I think is going on when it could be completely wrong.
Yeah, we're missing out on something else that's happening.
So, and that's where the mindfulness comes in.
Right. Yeah, and it's hard to get into that fight. It seems like it's such a strong force, all these shoulds and stories and all that. There's so much pressure, so it's like, I'm always trying to think about like how do I form this better habit of just, letting those down, like being mindful of what story am I telling myself right now.
Right, which channel am I on? Yeah, and I think maybe this is the first step though, is just as you very correctly, accurately pointed out, is being able to see how the mind does that. Right? Because most of the time, we're like so into the situation we don't even. It's just like it just goes. Right?
It's so easy because it is so ingrained, especially in our culture. Like Stephen was saying, for resonating, like, oh, I should know this. If they're all talking about this, like, I should know this. And it's hard. Like, if you're accepting of yourself and showing yourself self-compassion, you have to open up and be vulnerable. That's sort of what I meant before. But that's something I'm trying to work on too. But it seems like it could be so freeing. Like what happened if you did that? Would you reject it, or can it then that's our story again? It's like, what if you agree that this can really happen? But I do the same thing. It's not really,
It's just, I think it's just innate, that innate sense of protecting ourselves. Yeah. Okay.
Well, recently my life, which is
this fits for me. And I had a self-image and a regular life image that is no longer real. And it took, this huge turn for me to become less capable to take care of myself in a certain way. And so this identity I've had my whole life, which is not real identity, it's because of how I grew up. I needed to adapt, and so I took on this identity. It doesn't work anymore. And now I don't know what there is. This is sort of what we're talking about.
Yeah, those transitions. Getting there.
Yeah, to look at it as a positive instead of as a negative. Very hard.
Yeah. Well, I guess we're reinventing ourselves moment by moment. Being able to watch. All right. All right, so I think we basically covered the main thing. We talked about fear, what we feel most, feeling locked in our egos, feeling judged, disliked, rejected. And so being able to sit with those fears, to see, what's real, what's not real. The courage to be vulnerable, to make our own decisions, doing what others expect us to do. Right? Having the courage to open ourselves up, not just to others, but to ourselves, be able to see our own vulnerabilities. And I think once we're better able to do that, then we're more likely to have the strength, have the courage to go out and even go out on a limb to help somebody else. And Tripin talks about how compassion takes courage, how it makes courage. So by being compassionate, then that's a side effect. Actually, gives rise to more courage. So he says, by adopting the broader perspective of others' needs. So again, by stepping outside of our own narrow confines, boundaries of self, right? Putting aside our own needs, at least temporarily, then that frees us from our own preoccupations with the self, our own fears, the fear of that's associated with defending, protecting ourselves. And by stepping into the broader picture to help, then we realize, that we're not alone, and then we can treasure and draw strength from our common. So he also, and I thought this was interesting, he gives some examples of the barriers to compassion, and they're all kind of based on a misunderstanding of what compassion is. So let me see if I can find that for a second. So let's see. Maybe I can. Did most of you read the chapter? You read the chapter. Okay. So whatever. So that's good. Thank you. And he talks about some examples of 3 kinds of fear: fear of compassion for others, fear of compassion from others, like receiving it, fear of compassion for oneself. So, for example, when we relate in relation to compassion for others, he has a series of statements, right? So I think I'll read some of these, but then the purpose in sharing this in his chapter here, I think, was to show us how some of these things that we think of as compassion are really not compassion as we've been talking about it. Okay, so it's important to recognize what is compassion and what's not. So for compassion for others, so just think, is this something that would pop into your mind? People will take advantage of me if I am too compassionate and forgiving. I think we were just talking about that, right? If I'm too compassionate, others will become dependent on me. I can't tolerate others with distress, suffering. People should help themselves rather than waiting for others to help them. There are some people who don't deserve compassion. Right? Is that really compassion as we've defined it? Not so much, right? Compassion from others. I'm afraid that if I need other people to be kind to me, they will not be so. So having that expectation and having it not met. I worry that people are only kind and compassionate when they want something from me. An example of fearing a compassion for oneself. I fear that if I'm more self-compassionate, I will become weak. I fear that if I start to feel compassion for myself, I will be overcome with sadness and grief. And the last, this was the first one I thought was kind of interesting. I fear if I develop compassion for myself, I will become someone I don't want to be. That's interesting. Okay, so his point is that, well, what do you think? What are these fears? Where do they come from? How are these not in sync with what we were talking about in terms of what compassion is all about? You got it?
It's this underlying idea that compassion is weak.
The recurring theme, right? Right. And yet, what have we been talking about is compassion. Remember, we had talked earlier also about how compassion has a sense of, discrimination or wisdom associated with it, right? It's not just this like sentimental gushy feeling, right? We talked about how, compassion can be tough sometimes. Compassion can be a helping hand, but there's a sense of, knowing what's right in a situation, a sense of discernment, right? It's not just a sentimental, gushy feeling. Yeah. Okay.
I add one thing too.
Please.
We also have this idea that emotions are bad.
Okay.
That the logical mind is the only way to go. And in fact, that's not accurate. We need both.
Right.
One not overcoming the other. And that meeting place, I would argue, is where compassion is.
Right. That's very well said. Yeah, it's both. It's not just, one or the other. It's not just touchy-feely, gushy, but right. So you have to balance it with this sense of wisdom. Making good choices is based on discernment, understanding a situation from both perspectives, all perspectives, right? Yeah. So you don't end up in, a situation where you're shutting the door, closing the door to compassion because of not being able to make those distinctions, right? Okay, so we're going to do a little exercise here. So this is an opportunity to explore this this question, which I'm going to pose to you, and we've done this in other classes. This isn't something that I created myself. So what we do is we break up in pairs, and then you'll have 2 minutes. So we're going to take turns, right? So let's say Dan is working with, I forgot your name. Lori? Okay, so let's say Dan and Lori are working together. So let's say Dan starts. So Dan's going to ask this question. And the question is, what prevents you from having self-compassion? And Lori will respond. Now, so the trick here is that you respond quickly, right? Don't go on for 15 minutes because you only have 2 minutes, right? So it's supposed to be like the top of your head. What is your initial, response to this question? And then so Lori will say fear, and then whatever. And then Dan's going to repeat the question. What prevents you from having self-compassion? And then again, just whatever hits you, just a couple of words, and then Dan again repeats the question. Okay, so you have to, so we keep that going for 2 minutes, and then we're going to switch, and then you're going to ask Dan the same question, and Dan will respond based on his understanding for 2 minutes. Okay, does that make sense? And it's interesting because as you think, oh, 2 minutes isn't very long, but by the end, like in 1 minute, 30 seconds, you're thinking of different things, right? And so of course, the longer you did the exercise, you'd be surprised at how you start digging and really deepening your response. Okay, so again, the point is short responses. Right? Don't go on and on and on with one answer. We don't want pages. We want just a very succinct response. Okay.
Are you setting the timers for us, or should we set timers?
Yeah. So if you can use your phone to use the stopwatch or timer feature, that would be easier because there'll be slight variations in when we start. Okay. So Dan and Lori, Beth, and your name? Tom. John. Well, I'm very bad at names. Beth and John. You're? Malcolm. Malcolm and Sue. Okay, Malcolm and Sue. Stephen and Bree. Guy. And Scott. Oh my gosh, I'm on a roll. Yvonne and Bruce. Bruce, yes, I knew that. It was in there somewhere. Okay, so sit together. Take out your timer. Figure out how are you going to do the time. Introduce yourself if you don't know each other. Take a minute, just introduce yourself. Decide who wants to start first, who wants to ask the question. Yeah, so the question is, just to repeat the question one more time, it's what prevents you from having self-compassion? What prevents you from having self-compassion? Okay?
What I expected of myself not being conscious slide back.
Okay, remember, it's not a conversation. Okay, hang on, break. Okay, sorry. So when we do this, I'm sorry, I didn't explain this clearly. So the person who is asking the question asks the question, the respondent responds, but there's no conversation in between, okay? You don't have to be like, if the questioner doesn't say, oh, well, that's really interesting, I feel the same way, okay, it's an interesting exercise, it's strictly one way.
I was about to say, it's not the seems to.
Okay. All right, so I just want to, okay. So if you want to start over, you can start over. Does anybody need to start over? No, everyone did it right?
I think we'll just.
Good enough?
Here.
Okay, all right. So just keep going and then switch when you're ready.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
That's our 2 minutes. This is hard to go out. You ready? What prevents you from having
Different words.
Here, it's not having boundaries from it, so that won't happen. Oh, what happened was, to know that
Okay, raise your hand when your group is done, please.
I was much less introspective.
But it's fear. So having some passion,
Okay. So now that we have explored meaning of self-compassion, we've talked about some of the barriers to self-compassion, talked about the relationship between self-esteem and self-compassion, right? How we need to have a healthy relationship with ourselves. We need both a good sense of who we are, self-esteem, as well as being able to care for ourselves, to accept ourselves, self-acceptance, self-compassion. So let's look a little bit more into some of the different qualities of self-compassion or aspects. So again, I'm going back to the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook by Dr. Kristen Neff and Christopher Dermer. So they have written a whole chapter on the different qualities of self-compassion. So I just wanted to read these, something for you to contemplate as you go through your week. So she talks about, or they talk about how self-compassion includes comforting. So comforting, like just as we would comfort a friend who is struggling with something, then we need to be able to identify and respond to our own emotional needs with a sense of being able to comfort ourselves, right? And then at the same time, comforting is closely related to this idea of soothing, right? Making ourselves feel physically calmer, as well as validating. So being able to help a person feel better by helping them understand exactly what's going on in a situation, and being able to just understand and not, I don't think justify is the right word, but to be able to let's just say understand what you're actually what feeling, right? And then they talk about protecting, providing, and motivating. So those three aspects of compassion. So being able to feel safe from harm. So if somebody is actively, hurting us, being able to protect ourselves by saying no. It goes along with the idea of safeguarding, right? And providing means giving ourselves what we really need. So first, identifying what we need in a given situation, generating the conviction that we deserve what we need at that specific time, and that we give ourselves, with permission to go ahead and reach out and get what we need. So in all of these cases, the central premise is that we have to be our own best friends, right? And nobody else is going to look out for us. But really, we're in a sense, being our own therapist. The title of the book by and then motivating. Motivating us in the sense of like being like a good coach. So holding ourselves to our goals, to our aspirations, keeping us going with that positive energy. Yes. So instead of criticizing ourselves, saying, "Oh, you want to do that, but you messed up again," rather than us criticizing ourselves, giving ourselves a good pep talk, and picking ourselves up when we fall down, and saying that it's okay to keep trying. All right. So those are all, when you think about it, those are exactly the things that a good friend or, a loved one would do for us. It's the type of feedback, the type of relationship, type of support, right? That somebody who we care for would extend to us, as well as, these are the natural things that we do in turn, right? So just, I think, a nice reminder of what it means to be a good friend to ourselves. Any questions or feedback, comments? Anything surprising?
I have a piece of feedback because as we're doing that exercise, I'm like, I realize like I don't know, I was never something explicitly taught to like have self-compassion. Like we're constantly told, to be kind to others, especially children, right?
Mm-hmm.
But growing up, I don't recall ever being taught to be kind to myself so much.
Mm-hmm.
I was taught to like, okay, compete and like be your best.
Right,
Like
right.
that.
Like
So no wonder.
high on the self-esteem, but low on the self-compassion, right?
Yeah. So it's just learning how to do the skill.
Scott?
And for me, it was interesting is that a lot of this went back to childhood events, where I didn't have certain things or certain things happen. And what I realized is that I have to limit the impact of those events, not myself.
Mm. Okay, Yvonne?
I have a teacher who actually, he's a psychologist and he met with physical illness. And they were talking about, the difficulties for Westerners to really have self-compassion. And they talked about low self-esteem. And apparently His Holiness was very puzzled for a while. And there was a deep conversation with his translator trying to understand what that meant.
Right.
Because it's such a foreign concept, apparently, in Tibetan culture. And it's something that is apparently uniquely Western. And I think we just have to understand that that's an obstacle that we have, and that we have to sort of overcome. And that is something to remember and be kind to ourselves, that that's our obstacle as well.
Right. Yeah. And actually, Thupten Jinpa, I think, was the translator during that conversation, and he mentions it somewhere in the book. He did bring up that specific example. But yeah. I think that the upshot of the chapter is the how we define ourselves as individuals and the sense of connection that we feel with others. That seems to be the key, the sense of understanding ourselves and accepting ourselves, with self-compassion. In the broader sense of our connections with others, right? So really drawing on that sense of community, really drawing on those friends and whoever's in our circle, being able to use that as the platform, if you will, for understanding ourselves and being able to both help ourselves and others.
So that makes sense to me again because of being so individualistic in our world, but also
Right.
I grew up alone. I always felt like kind of a feral person in a way,
Mm-hmm.
And so there was no compassion. There was more sense of survival.
Yeah.
And that's still what's been true for me.
Yeah. The loneliness in America, we talked about, a little bit in the first class. It's like an epidemic, right? There was a story on NPR, National Public Radio, about how loneliness, it's actually not as much a problem for older people as it is for the young people younger than us guys, the Gen X's, people who are in their 20s. Loneliness, I think the researchers were surprised when they came to that conclusion, but yeah, that's something that is a trend, and where mindfulness and the resources such as mindfulness and self-compassion are particularly relevant and helpful.
Can I say something?
Of course.
You know what? And then getting back to kind of what Yvonne said about the concept of self-esteem being, lack of self-esteem being foreign, maybe to Babylon or to Eastern culture. I found it interesting in the book here when they give the fear of compassion for oneself, the three bullet points there. And none of them are mentioning non-deserving. Because all of these, I don't agree with this personally. I mean, I don't connect with this. So those of lack of fear of compassion for oneself. And in the exercise, I mean, where I was coming from was from a totally different place. And I think it's that tie, again, that I don't mean to make this a therapy session, so, something other than what it is, but there's so much emphasis, I think, put on self-worth. And I mean, as a kid, I remember I did treat everyone equally, and I did, whether it's animals, it's all living things. I didn't feel that one was more worthy than the other, really, which I think is a springboard for compassion, that ability to not judge. But I think as was also stated, I was never taught self-compassion, but then that ability to, or that formation of identity and a worth when compared to others,
Uh-huh.
that is then a mirror of where that compassion either is can get to or be a hurdle for. Kind of.
Okay.
So I think one thing that maybe I need to talk to the editor that we need to add one more thing here, but just the ability to feel deserving, I think, is part of it too. Or the inability to feel deserving, to have self-compassion, certainly not for others, but for oneself.
Uh-huh.
And it is, I don't know, I think sometimes easier to, treat others. I think it's, people are capable of treating different people differently, which means, there's me and everybody else in the world.
So you're saying that under fear of compassion for oneself, well, how would you state that? I fear that if I
Fear that I don't deserve it.
don't deserve it. Okay. Okay.
And however that can be elaborated.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's, yeah.
And
That's a good one.
If somebody
we talked
feels
about that.
sorry,
And I know I'm repeating the same thing, so I apologize for that.
No, that's good. That's good. I think you're right. It is it's something that was brought up earlier that should be in here. Because he talks about how having compassion for others doesn't mean people aren't accountable for their actions. We might think that some people simply don't deserve our compassion. Then likewise, along the same lines, yeah, we might think that we ourselves don't deserve compassion, right? Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Is that what he was getting at with the one about becoming someone I don't like if I share compassion with myself? In the list of
And the very
barriers
first
to
one.
self-compassion?
Hang on. We'll talk about this specifically.
I saw that as being, having the ability to be self-indulgent and then not being disciplined with yourself. My profession does not allow for any laziness whatsoever and stuff. And I have to be very careful about my self-discipline in regards to my work.
Huh.
And one fear for self-compassion is I'm okay, so I don't need to do all this work that sits before me. And it's a lot of my emergency position in an academic medical center. I have to read a lot of medical literature, and it's not the most exciting thing to read all the time. But that's part of what I need to do. And if I give myself, quote unquote, too much self-compassion, I just kind of let it slide. But then I wouldn't be working at the institution I get to work at otherwise.
I would just add to that, this idea of peak performance. I don't know if you may be familiar with that. And it is this idea of taking care of ourselves, giving ourselves breaks and whatever, and we actually perform better.
Right, but again, the problem being is that, again, what this, you're talking a more general thing. This is, I'm speaking more specifically right now to the, that I won't like the person I will become if I become too self-compassionate. Yeah, so, but I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think we're talking something different.
I think there's also an element there of having to give up parts of ourselves based on wants. Whether it's not just, I think it's also, we have to let go of parts of ourselves that we benefit from, that we get something out of, and then figuring out how we move forward.
think it's sort of like grasping that compassion might be a new track for how to move forward, as opposed to using whatever skill sets you've been using in the past. How is the past working out for you? Maybe compassion is a complete entity in itself for how to move forward.
I like the notion of what you were saying is it's a skill, right? Like, so it gives me hope that if it's a skill, I can learn it.
The resource,
Yeah.
yeah, a new approach. Okay.
Hope for us all.
All right, so moving on just a little bit. The next big subject is how to let go of resistance. So letting go of resistance is the definition of acceptance. Right? And so Tendrol talks on page 62 of how. So when circumstances are not working out the way we had hoped them to work out, if events don't have the anticipated outcome that we were promised, maybe, basically if things aren't going the way we had hoped that they would go, then naturally, fear and frustration, anger tend to arise. And so instead of being able to accept that the situation is what it is, right? Instead, we tend to vent our emotions. We tend to kick and scream, right? So, what would be a more helpful approach or solution? So one of the ways of thinking that we can practice is to go back to this idea of impermanence. Right? And so in the Buddhist way of thinking, then reflections on impermanence, very, very important. That's one of the core principles, is that everything is in a state of change. At a very, very subtle level, all the way up to the more gross, more obvious examples of change that we can see and witness, experience, right? And so he writes on page 62, he says, the pain of losing what we have, not finding what we desire, getting what we don't want, these are part and parcel of what it means to live. They're essential aspects of our common human experience. They don't come about because somehow we have failed to get things right. And so change, and being able to accept that all of these, what were known as the 8 worldly dharmas, right? Ending up, instead of getting the praise that we thought we deserved, instead getting blamed, right? And the like. All of that is just part of the natural course of things. It's not due to our own failures, our own inability to do something correctly. Our happiness lies not in avoiding pain and sorrow, but in not letting them disturb our basic equilibrium, the calm of allowing, at least for the moment, the way things are. The sooner we make peace with them, the sooner we can stop reacting and start living with compassion for ourselves and for others. So, reflecting on impermanence, reflecting on how things of their own course will come together and disappear, dissolve, being able to accept that type of moment to moment, as well as that type of change at the subtle level as well as the grosser level. By meditating on that type of change, by realizing that it occurs, really beyond our ordinary control, right? If you talk about, become familiar with the idea of karma, how things are the fruition of actions taken in the immediate past, as well as going back further and further and further in time, then we can see that really the only thing that we can do to maintain our happiness is to be able to work with our own minds, right? Being able to do that on a moment-to-moment basis, right? And in that way, to nurture and preserve the sense of inner equilibrium, inner peace, going forward. And so acceptance then is understanding how the nature of reality exists, how it unfolds, and how our minds determine whether or not they hold on to that inner peace. So it's a choice, right? It comes down to a choice. Okay, so it looks like we didn't quite get to the exercise that we were going to do, so, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. We'll do it in the next class. So in the next class, we'll keep going with this discussion about resistance and the relationship between suffering and resistance. And the exercise was just reflecting on a particular situation in your life and how resistance may not be the best approach to working through it. So that's okay, we can do it in the next class. And let's see if I have one final quote. Just see. Sometimes if you take things out of context, it doesn't. So let me, I think this is the closing quote is this. Okay, here. So this is a quote, actually this is good, from a book called It's Up to You, The Practice of Self-Reflection on the Buddhist Path by Dzigar Kongtrul. It's under in a chapter called Slowing Down. You may notice something very interesting when you slow down. As you experience more space in your mind, there's more distance between you and your emotional reactions. You may still react out of habit, but these reactions don't really have their hooks in you. You may react out of attachment, for example, but without feeling very attached. Or you may say something aggressive without really feeling the emotion of aggression. Seeing this is the beginning of being able to separate your true nature from your habits. It's important to know that these emotional reactions are not who we really are. They come from learned social conventions, from what we've been taught to value, and how we've been taught to react. For instance, someone cuts you off on the highway and you find yourself reacting aggressively, the way you've seen others do. You might even be surprised by the intensity of your reaction. In moments like this, try to slow down and reflect on your reactions. You may find them to be at odds with the way you would naturally respond. Okay, so I think we're in with that. Yeah, so that goes kind of back to the mindfulness meditation that we did in the beginning of class, being able to use a mindfulness to watch our reactions, watch emotions as they arise, creating that space, keeping that perspective, right? Okay, so we'll close with our after meditation. In gladness and in safety, may all living beings be at ease, whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all living beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. May no one have anger or ill will, and let none wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart may we cherish all living beings. May we radiate kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, free from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, we must sustain this recollection. May we and all others be able to live in pure conscience and moral conduct, train ourselves in the heroic mind concerning others, and develop the accurate view of interdependency. And thus may anyone who sees, hears, remembers, touches, or talks to us be free from all sufferings and abide in peace and happiness forever. Until the end of all sorrows of the world, may the beneficial instructions never be blown away by the wind of superstitions. May all genuine spiritual guides live long, and may the entire world be filled with people who seek for truth and find aspiration in authentic teachings. Hey, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Wash away.
Yeah, yesterday when we were driving back from.
Yeah. You know, like skating on the highway.
Well, everyone was going pretty slow. Really, but everyone was pretty good.
So you weren't sliding?
No, no.
Yeah, very Is it? I'm pretty sure. I'm not gonna forget too fast. Yeah.
When I put it.
Hey, you know.
We really got this new friend, probably the one yesterday.
Oh, really?